Welcome to Sign Facts, where every movie hides a secret. Every scene tells a deeper story. And every frame contains details most viewers never notice, from legendary blockbusters and mind-bending science fiction to dark thrillers, unforgettable horror, and hidden cinematic gems. We explore the facts, theories, Easter eggs, behind-the-scenes secrets, and untold stories that make movies truly unforgettable. This isn't just watching movies, this is discovering what lies beneath them. Subscribe to Sign Facts, and step beyond the screen. Then, to everyone's surprise, he reaches into his pocket, hands John some money, and suggests he buy himself a drink instead. The unexpected gesture leaves John embarrassed and without a response. Deciding not to push the matter further, H walks away. Watching from nearby, Bullet finds the whole exchange amusing and jokingly calls H a master of social interaction. Not long after, a routine workday suddenly turns into a nightmare. During a pickup involving only $10,000, Bullet exits the truck to retrieve the cash. Minutes pass, but he never comes back. Growing concerned, Sweet Boy repeatedly calls him over the radio. At first, there's no answer, then a voice finally responds. But it isn't Bullet. A group of robbers has taken him hostage. Fear immediately takes hold of Sweet Boy. Convinced they're outmatched, he insists they abandon the situation and return to headquarters. He argues that the amount of money involved is relatively small and that the criminals have no reason to kill Bullet over such a minor haul. H disagrees without hesitation. He refuses to leave their partner behind. His certainty is unwavering. Despite Sweet Boy's panic, H calmly insists they stay and follow the instructions being given. Eventually, his confidence persuades Sweet Boy to cooperate, and the pair continue according to the robbers' demands. They're directed to drive to an isolated location far from any witnesses. When they arrive, the danger becomes immediately clear. A masked criminal emerges from a vehicle, holding Bullet at gunpoint. Another armed robber orders H and Sweet Boy to transfer the cash bags into the trunk of a waiting car. The atmosphere is suffocatingly tense. One wrong move could get everyone killed. Sweet Boy is terrified and repeatedly begs H to do exactly as they're told. Convinced that any resistance will end in a massacre, H says very little. He walks to the rear of the truck and begins unloading the money bags one at a time. At first, it looks like he's complying. Then he deliberately throws one bag away from the others, letting it land several feet to the side. One of the robbers immediately notices and warns him not to get clever. Sweet Boy becomes even more frantic, desperately urging H to stop provoking them. The moment one of the criminals steps away to retrieve the misplaced bag, H makes his move. In a flash, he draws his weapon and fires. The robber collecting the bag drops instantly. A split second later, H shoots the gunman holding Bullet captive. The situation explodes into violence as the remaining attackers return fire, and a fierce gun battle erupts. Bullets fly across the isolated lot while H methodically takes down the armed men one after another. Despite the overwhelming resistance, one of the robbers manages to escape the firefight and flees on foot. H immediately goes after him, leaving Bullet and Sweet Boy behind, and tracks the fleeing criminal into a deserted warehouse nearby. The chase is brief. H quickly corners the man among the abandoned structure's shadows and debris. With the robber trapped, H demands answers, wanting to know who orchestrated the attack. Instead of cooperating, the criminal responds with insults and mockery. The taunts have no effect. Without showing the slightest emotion, H simply knocks the man unconscious. A short time later, Bullet and Sweet Boy finally catch up and find him standing over the defeated robber. Calm as ever, H casually asks Sweet Boy whether he still feels capable of handling robbers on his own, a subtle jab at the confidence he'd shown earlier. Still shaken by everything that's happened, both Bullet and Sweet Boy can do little more than stare, struggling to process what they've just witnessed. After the gunfight, H walks among the fallen attackers, his attention fixed on the men lying motionless on the ground. One by one, he removes their masks, carefully examining each face. He's clearly searching for someone specific, but every face he uncovers belongs to a stranger, and the person he desperately wants to find isn't among them. For the first time, A trace of disappointment breaks through his normally emotionless expression. Not long afterward, federal investigators arrive to process the scene. Two FBI agents begin questioning H about what happened during the confrontation, their focus quickly shifting to his performance during the shootout. According to Fortico's records, H barely qualified with a firearm during training, yet witnesses report that he eliminated multiple armed suspects with astonishing efficiency. The agents point out the contradiction and ask him to explain. Without showing the slightest concern, H shrugs it off. He claims that fear and adrenaline can push people beyond their normal limits, say that faced with a life-threatening situation, his instincts simply took over. The investigators then show him surveillance footage from an older robbery. The video captures a gunman executing 3 victims during a separate incident. They ask whether the blurry figure looks familiar. H studies the recording carefully for several moments before calmly saying he's never seen the individual before. Later, away from H, the agents share their concerns with their supervisor, FBI Agent King. They admit they believe H may actually be a notorious figure they've been monitoring for decades. The possibility alone makes them uneasy. King, however, seems entirely unbothered. He dismisses their suspicions with a casual remark, describing H as the kind of man who can create whatever story he needs to protect himself. In King's view, getting involved would only create unnecessary complications, so he instructs his team to keep their distance and let H continue whatever he's doing. Meanwhile, Fortico management reviews the aftermath of the incident. Following company regulations, Terry recommends that H be removed from active duty temporarily. A standard procedure requires employees involved in traumatic events to undergo psychological evaluation before returning to work. Terry suggests a month away from the field. The company owner sees things differently. Rather than viewing H as a liability, he believes the employee's actions have generated positive attention for Fortico. A guard who successfully fought off armed criminals is exactly the kind of publicity the company needs after its recent troubles. Instead of suspending him, the boss effectively rewards him. As a result, H returns to work immediately and continues operating armored trucks as if nothing happened. Behind the scenes, though, he's pursuing a completely different agenda. Without drawing attention to himself, H hires someone to gather information on every employee connected to Fortico. He wants comprehensive profiles on everyone: personnel files, family photographs, background information, and even reports on the security guards killed during the original robbery all become part of his growing investigation. Piece by piece, he begins assembling a much larger puzzle. 3 months pass. One day, H and Bullet are completing another routine pickup route when danger strikes again. Their armored truck suddenly comes under attack from a fresh group of criminals. The robbers immediately spray thick black paint across the windshield and mirrors, blinding the occupants inside and cutting off their visibility. Recognizing the threat, Bullet instantly calls in a red alert. The attackers continue pressing forward, using heavy equipment to try to force entry into the vehicle and drag the guards out. The situation quickly spirals into chaos. Amid the confusion, Bullet stumbles out of the truck, coughing violently. H exits moments later. The robbers point their weapons at him and order him to the ground. Then something strange happens. The second they get a clear look at his face, their confidence evaporates. Instead of continuing the robbery, they abruptly abandon the operation, retreating without another word and leaving both the truck and the money untouched. Back at headquarters, nobody can make sense of what happened. Terry struggles to understand why armed criminals would suddenly walk away from a guaranteed payday. Even more baffling is the fact that H somehow emerges unscathed from yet another dangerous encounter. The company owner remains as cryptic as ever. Rather than searching for explanations, he simply encourages Terry to keep promoting the accomplishments of their star employee. Bullet, however, has developed his own theory. Speaking privately with a co-worker, he admits that something about H unsettles him. He can't explain exactly why, but the man gives off an eerie presence. The best description he can come up with is that H feels less like an ordinary person and more like some kind of dark force walking among them. While H's professional life grows increasingly mysterious, his personal life begins moving in a different direction. Dana finally decides to act on the attraction she's been hiding for months. She confesses how she feels, and before long the two spend the night together at her apartment. For a brief moment, it looks like H may be allowing someone to get close to him. The illusion doesn't last. Late that night, Dana suddenly finds herself staring down the barrel of a gun. H stands before her with a completely different demeanor than the one she knows, and his expression cold, his voice controlled, his intentions unmistakably serious. He demands an explanation for a stash of cash he recently discovered in her possession. Convinced she may be connected to a larger criminal operation, H begins questioning her relentlessly. Dana insists there's no conspiracy. According to her, the money wasn't delivered for anyone else. She claims she stole it herself during a previous assignment and acted alone. H isn't convinced. To make matters worse, he reveals just how much information he's collected about her life. Details about her family, her associates, and the people closest to her. The revelation leaves Dana shaken. As the interrogation continues, she desperately maintains her innocence, insisting she has no involvement in any organized scheme. The story then jumps back 5 months, revealing a side of H that nobody at Fortico has ever seen. On that day, he's simply a father spending time with his son, Doogie. The two share a rare, peaceful afternoon together, a brief escape from the responsibilities and dangers that usually surround H's life. For a short while, everything feels normal. Then his phone rings. The call is from Mike, one of H's associates. Unknown to Doogie, Mike has recently taken part in a robbery and is now dealing with an unexpected problem. He explains that their operation has hit a snag, and one member of the crew can't reach an important observation point near H's location. Mike asks for a small favor. All H needs to do is watch a Fortico armored truck leave its facility and report which direction it turns. Initially, H wants no part of it. Eventually, though, he agrees. As he and Doogie drive toward the area, H notices a food truck parked nearby. Seeing an opportunity to avoid suspicion, he pulls over and tells his son he's going to buy lunch, asking Doogie to stay in the car while he grabs a couple of burritos. Standing near the food truck, H keeps an eye on the facility entrance. Soon enough, the armored truck emerges and turns right. H relays the information to Mike. What he doesn't realize is that another group of criminals is already waiting nearby. Just moments later, the Fortico truck is ambushed by robbers disguised as road construction workers. The attack unfolds only a short distance from where H and Doogie are parked. During the robbery, one of the criminals notices a boy sitting alone in the vehicle. Suspicious, the robber approaches and orders Doogie to step outside. Terrified, Doogie calls for his father, but H is still absorbed in a phone conversation with Mike and never hears him. Following the robber's instructions, Doogie exits the vehicle and lies face down on the pavement. Then tragedy strikes. At exactly the wrong moment, Doogie turns his head and catches sight of the robber removing his mask. In that instant, he sees something he was never supposed to see. The decision is immediate. The robber executes the security guards and then murders Doogie as well. Only then does H realize something is terribly wrong. He sprints back toward the scene and arrives just in time to witness the horrifying aftermath. His son's killer stands only a short distance away. Consumed by rage, H rushes forward without hesitation. Before he can reach the man, a gunshot rings out. H is struck and collapses, helpless to stop the nightmare unfolding before him. 3 weeks later, H finally opens his eyes in a hospital room. The physical wounds from the shooting are severe, but they pale in comparison to the emotional devastation waiting for him. As he struggles to process what happened, doctors and loved ones deliver the news he's been dreading. His son Doogie is gone. The loss hits him like a freight train. As if the grief isn't unbearable enough, Doogie's mother directs her anger toward him. In her eyes, H failed in the most important responsibility a parent can have. She accuses him of being emotionally distant and blames him for putting their son in danger. Every word cuts deeper than the bullet wound in his chest. Unable to defend himself, H is left drowning in guilt, replaying the tragedy over and over in his mind. Before long, sorrow begins transforming into something darker. Determined to find the people responsible, H reaches out to an old ally, FBI agent King. Although King has connections within law enforcement, even he has limits as the information he can provide is far from complete, but he does hand over a list of criminals who might have ties to the robbery. For H, that's enough to begin. Together with Mike and several trusted associates, he launches a relentless search through the city's criminal network. Their methods are brutal and uncompromising. Suspects are tracked down, questioned, and eliminated one after another. The operation leaves a trail of destruction behind it, but despite months of bloodshed, the one man H truly wants remains out of reach. The investigation eventually reaches a dead end. Recognizing they're chasing shadows, Mike suggests approaching the problem from a completely different angle. Rather than hunting criminals from the outside, they should place someone inside the environment connected to the robbery. H agrees to make the plan work. He announces he'll be returning to London for a while. In reality, he has something far more strategic in mind. He instructs his assistant to build an entirely new identity. The name chosen is Patrick Hill. Every detail is fabricated with precision. Employment records, background information, certifications, and professional references are all carefully created to portray Hill as a reliable security professional with an impressive history. Once the false identity is complete, H uses it to secure employment with Fortico Security. His goal is simple: get inside the company, stay close to the people connected to the robbery, and eventually uncover the individual responsible for Doogie's death. The story then shifts back in time, revealing events that occurred months before H joined Fortico. A group of 6 former military veterans has fallen on hard times. Financial struggles and frustration with civilian life have left them bitter and restless. Their leader is Jackson, a respected former sergeant who still commands authority among the men. Bound together by shared experience and growing desperation, the veterans begin discussing ways to make money outside the law. One member in particular, Jan, pushes aggressively for action. Unlike some of the others, Jan isn't interested in small gains or long-term planning. He wants fast money and is willing to take risks to get it. Under his encouragement, the crew begins targeting wealthy individuals from affluent Middle Eastern communities. The robberies prove successful. At first, the payouts amount to only a few $100,000, but once the money starts flowing, ambition quickly takes over. While Jackson remains the group's unquestioned leader, Jan's growing confidence begins creating friction. The more successful they become, the more Jan starts viewing himself as Jackson's equal, perhaps even his replacement. As their operations expand, the crew grows frustrated with the complicated process of converting stolen valuables into usable cash. Too many middlemen are involved, cutting into profits and increasing risk. Jackson eventually proposes a better solution. Instead of stealing luxury goods, they should target armored trucks directly. The new strategy is far simpler. With access to cash already in transit, fewer people need to be involved, and larger profits become possible. The plan requires only a single insider, allowing the earnings to be split into 7 equal shares. The results exceed expectations. Millions of dollars begin flowing into the crew's hands. Despite their success, Jackson repeatedly reminds everyone to stay disciplined. He warns them not to quit their jobs, draw attention to themselves, or suddenly start living extravagant lifestyles. Most of the crew listens. Jan does not. Time after time, he ignores Jackson's advice and behaves recklessly, creating unnecessary risks that threaten the entire operation. The tension between them keeps building. Eventually, during a birthday gathering for Jackson, the crew begins discussing one final score, one bigger than anything they've attempted before. Their target is a Fortico armored truck carrying an enormous amount of cash. Preparation begins immediately. The crew carefully plans every detail, choosing to disguise themselves as road construction workers to avoid raising suspicion. When the day arrives, each member takes his position exactly where he needs to be. What none of them realize is that H has unknowingly parked nearby with Doogie sitting inside his vehicle. At first, Jackson notices the parked car but sees no immediate threat. He simply tells his men to keep an eye on it while they focus on the robbery. The operation begins smoothly. The crew intercepts the armored truck and forces the guards out. Jan takes control of one guard while the others move into position. Meanwhile, Another crew member approaches H's vehicle and orders Doogie out of the car. Terrified, the boy obeys. He's forced to lie face down on the pavement while the robbery continues around him. At the same time, the rest of the crew quickly loads bags of cash and secures the scene. For several minutes, everything appears to be going exactly as planned. Then things go wrong. One of the security guards suddenly tries to reach for a weapon. Jan reacts instantly without hesitation. He pulls away the guard's face covering and shoots him dead. Seconds later, he kills the second guard as well. Elsewhere, Jackson asks whether everything remains under control. Jan calmly says it does, deliberately leaving out the fact that the situation is rapidly spiraling beyond their original plan. Lying on the ground nearby, Doogie has witnessed far more than he should have. The boy has seen faces, he's seen actions. Most importantly, he could potentially identify them later. The realization changes everything. Without a shred of hesitation, Jan raises his weapon and shoots Doogie. For a moment, the entire crew is stunned. One of the men immediately explodes with anger, shouting that Jan has just jeopardized all of them. Killing a child was never part of the plan, and everyone understands the consequences that could follow. The argument grows heated. Then somebody spots movement in the distance. Is running toward them. Panic spreads through the group. One crew member urges Jan to stop him without killing him, suggesting a shot to the leg or somewhere non-fatal. Jan ignores the advice. Instead, he aims directly at H's chest and pulls the trigger. The bullet strikes home. As H collapses, Jan stares directly at him, creating a moment neither man will ever forget. Months later, the crew gathers once again. Despite earning millions from previous robberies, satisfaction remains out of reach as their greed has only grown stronger. Jackson wastes no time confronting Jan, reminding him how close his recklessness came to destroying everything they built. Jan's actions during the Fortico robbery nearly exposed the entire operation. But the lecture isn't the reason for the meeting. Jackson has a new plan, and it's their biggest yet. He proposes one final robbery that will dwarf every previous score. The target isn't a single truck, it's the entire Fortico operation. Specifically, he wants to strike on Black Friday, when an estimated $150 million will be moving through the company's network. The reward is enormous. So are the risks. Jackson tells the crew that if they succeed, none of them will ever need another job for the rest of their lives. Back at Fortico headquarters, preparations for Black Friday are already underway. Terry gathers the guards and warns them that security threats are expected to increase. Everyone is instructed to stay alert and follow procedures carefully. Meanwhile, tensions continue growing within Jackson's crew. Jan's behavior remains a constant source of frustration as expensive purchases and careless spending habits threaten to attract exactly the kind of attention Jackson has worked so hard to avoid. Eventually, the day of the operation arrives. H and Bullet are assigned to work together once again. After completing their final route, Bullet decides it's time to reveal the truth. What follows changes everything. He confesses that he was the insider who helped facilitate the robbery months earlier at the very robbery that resulted in multiple deaths, including Doogie's. According to Bullet, the guards were never meant to survive. Their deaths had always been part of the plan. Doogie's murder, however, was not. He insists the child was never supposed to die and describes it as an unforeseen consequence of the robbery. The revelation alone is devastating. But Bullet isn't finished. He calmly informs H that he secretly removed the ammunition from his firearm, ensuring he'd be unable to fight back when the time came. Then he reveals the final piece of the puzzle. The crew intends to rob the Fortico depot that very day. Bullet advises H not to resist if he stays quiet and cooperates. He might live through what's coming. As the truth settles in, H finally understands the full scale of the betrayal surrounding him. Every clue, every suspicion, and every unanswered question suddenly points toward a single inevitable conclusion. A deadly reckoning is about to begin. With the plan now in motion, Bullet disables the recording equipment inside the armored truck and steers the vehicle toward the Fortico depot. Waiting there are Jackson and the rest of his crew, ready to launch the operation they've spent months preparing for. As the group gathers, one of the robbers walks over to H and slams him across the face. The message is clear: stay quiet, follow instructions, and don't interfere." Moments later, Jan and 3 of the veterans climb into the armored truck. Jackson and another member remain in a separate vehicle, staying close behind as the convoy heads toward its target. Everything unfolds exactly as planned. The depot gates recognize the truck and open without hesitation. The instant the vehicle enters the yard, the robbers make their move. Armed men pour out of the truck and rapidly seize control of the surrounding area. Employees and guards are caught completely off guard. Terry is captured almost immediately, along with H and the boy. To avoid raising suspicion, Bullitt even allows himself to be treated as a hostage despite being part of the operation. Elsewhere on the property, Dana approaches another armored truck to get paperwork from Stewart, one of the guards. Completely unaware of the robbery unfolding nearby, she's distracted when Stewart starts showing her a funny video on his phone. Inside the depot, the criminals tighten their grip on the situation. H is restrained to limit his movement, while one of the robbers presses a weapon against Bullitt's head to create the illusion that he's just another victim. The crew demands access to the heavily reinforced vault door and orders the staff inside to unlock it. Before they can comply, Sticky John notices the intruders. Realizing what's happening, he immediately triggers the alarm system. The response is instant. A gunfire erupts throughout the depot as security personnel engage the attackers. The robbers return fire aggressively while advancing toward their objective. During the exchange, one member of the crew plants explosive charges directly on the massive vault entrance. Bullets fly in every direction, thanks to their military-grade body armor. The robbers absorb several hits without suffering serious injuries. One member of the crew isn't as fortunate, however, and is badly wounded during the firefight. Then the explosives detonate. A deafening blast tears through the facility as the reinforced metal door is blown open. With the path cleared, Jackson drives into the vault area and joins the rest of the team. Now fully inside, he orders everyone to spread out, secure key positions, and maintain control of the building. Outside, police units begin arriving. The criminals know they have limited time before specialized tactical teams reach the scene. Once SWAT arrives, escaping with the money will become significantly more difficult. The clock is ticking. While some crew members stand guard, others begin stuffing enormous amounts of cash into bags. According to their calculations, they have roughly 8 minutes before heavily armed reinforcements arrive. The robbers systematically eliminate most of the depot guards during the takeover. However, 3 employees manage to avoid detection. Dana, Stewart, and Shirley conceal themselves inside the rear compartment of an armored truck, hoping to wait out the crisis. Stewart believes patience is their best chance of survival. He argues that SWAT will arrive soon and handle the situation. Shirley disagrees. Refusing to stay hidden, she decides to fight back. Without warning, she opens fire from her position and manages to wound one of the robbers. The unexpected attack creates a brief but valuable distraction. H immediately takes advantage of the opportunity. Using a small concealed firearm he's managed to keep hidden, he shoots one of the criminals in the leg. At the same time, he secretly cuts through his restraints with a knife concealed on his person. Free at last, he moves quickly. His first priority is Terry and the boy. After releasing them, H leaves the decision in their hands. When they ask what they should do next, he simply tells them to choose for themselves. They decide to run. Terry grabs the boy and guides him toward a rear exit, hoping to escape before the fighting reaches them. Meanwhile, H strips equipment from a dead robber and prepares to move through the depot unnoticed. The battle intensifies. Shirley continues exchanging fire with the criminals but is eventually overwhelmed and killed during the confrontation. Dana and Stewart refuse to surrender. Both arm themselves and begin fighting back against the attackers. As gunfire echoes through the depot, H advances through the chaos with deadly focus. He catches one robber off guard, removes the man's helmet, and eliminates him before moving on. The remaining crew members quickly realize someone is hunting them. A fierce gun battle follows. At one point, H comes face to face with a heavily armored robber, and the confrontation turns into a brutal hand-to-hand struggle. The two men trade powerful blows before H finally creates an opening and tries to fire his pistol. Nothing happens as the weapon is empty. Forced to improvise, H immediately reaches for his knife and uses it to finish the fight, bringing down the armored attacker at close range. Meanwhile, Jackson recognizes the operation is beginning to unravel. With police forces closing in, he orders the surviving crew members to grab whatever money they can and prepare to withdraw. Elsewhere, Bullitt locates Dana and Stewart, pretending to still be on their side. He claims he needs a weapon to help defend them. Stewart trusts him and hands over a firearm without hesitation. It proves to be a fatal mistake. The moment Bullitt has the gun, he turns it on them without warning or remorse. He shoots both Stewart and Dana, killing them instantly. At another part of the depot, H continues working his way through the remaining robbers. Two more fall before him, but just as he gains momentum, Bullitt catches him by surprise. A shot rings out, and H is hit and collapses, wounded once again. Bullitt isn't finished and his attention soon shifts to the boy. Calling out to him with chilling calmness, Bullitt lures him into view before shooting him as well. By the time the fighting finally subsides, only 3 members of the original crew remain alive: Jackson, Jan, and Bullitt. Knowing the police are rapidly closing in, they move toward the final phase of their escape plan. The survivors enter the building's underground garage, intending to disappear before authorities can seal off the area. As Bullitt and Jan load bags of cash onto a transport cart bound for an elevator, Jackson waits inside a nearby truck. He's badly wounded, but he's also thinking quietly. He reaches for his gun and raises it toward January. His expression reveals everything. Jackson has decided Jan has become too dangerous to trust. Unfortunately for him, Jan notices, and the realization comes only seconds before Jan makes his move. Without hesitation, he grabs a blade and cuts Jackson's throat. The betrayal is swift and calculated. Afterward, Jan casually tells Bullitt that Jackson succumbed to his injuries, concealing what truly happened as they continue their escape through a hidden tunnel system. Eventually, they emerge at the far end, where a getaway vehicle awaits. Together, they begin loading millions of dollars into the car. But another betrayal is already brewing. Bullitt understands exactly who Jan is. Watching Jackson die has convinced him that Jan will eventually turn on him as well. For a brief moment, Bullitt considers striking first. The hesitation costs him everything. Jan notices the subtle change in his behavior. Before Bullitt can act, Jan draws his weapon and fires. Bullitt drops dead. Now the sole survivor of the crew, Jan claims the entire fortune for himself and drives away, leaving every former ally behind. Sometime later, Jan sits comfortably inside his luxury apartment. Drink in hand, he finally allows himself to enjoy what looks like victory. The money is his, the witnesses are gone, and the operation seems finished. Then a phone begins ringing. Confused, Jan searches for the source of the sound and eventually discovers a phone hidden inside one of the stolen money bags. The discovery immediately puts him on edge. Before he can fully process what it means, he notices movement in the darkness. A figure slowly steps into view. It's H. For the first time in a long while, Jan looks genuinely unsettled. Trying to salvage the situation, he quickly offers H a share of the money, attempting to negotiate in the hope that wealth can buy his way out of danger. H doesn't answer. Instead, he throws a document onto the floor. Jan picks it up. As he reads, recognition spreads across his face. The document is Doogie's autopsy report. Every detail forces him to relive the events of that terrible day. 4 gunshot wounds, 4 vital organs destroyed: the liver, the lungs, the spleen, the heart. Memories of the robbery come rushing back, along with the realization of exactly who H is. Before Jan can react, H raises his weapon and delivers judgment. One shot, then another, and another. Each bullet strikes with deliberate precision, mirroring the wounds inflicted on Doogie years earlier. Jan collapses. The man responsible for H's suffering dies the same way he once condemned an innocent child. The revenge H has pursued for so long is finally complete. Wounded and limping, he leaves the apartment behind. Outside the building, someone is waiting. FBI agent King. Calm as ever, King watches H emerge and asks a simple question: is it done? H doesn't bother looking back. He gives a slight nod and continues walking into the darkness. At last, The hunt is over. Guy Ritchie's crime films have always had a certain attitude to them. You know how it goes. There's usually violence around every corner. A room full of dangerous people who all think they're smarter than they are. And that strange mix of style, arrogance, humor, and brutality that somehow makes the whole thing feel alive. But Wrath of Man is a little different. It's still very much a Guy Ritchie crime thriller. It has the armored trucks, the criminals, the hard men, the double crosses, the money, the sudden violence, and that grimy underworld feeling where nobody seems clean. But the energy here is colder, meaner. Honestly, it doesn't bounce along with the same cheeky rhythm you might expect from something like Snatch or Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. This one walks into the room, shuts the door, and keeps a straight face, and that's probably the first thing viewers will either appreciate or push back against. Wrath of Man is not a light crime caper. It's not the kind of gangster movie where the violence feels almost cartoonish because the dialogue is so quick and the characters are so ridiculous. This film is heavier than that, bloodier too. When people get shot in this movie, Ritchie doesn't exactly look away. The action has weight, the deaths are harsh, and the whole thing carries a rough, unpleasant edge that makes clear pretty early on. This is not a casual Sunday afternoon action movie. The opening alone tells you what kind of film you are dealing with. An armored truck is attacked in Los Angeles, and within minutes the movie has already dragged us into a world where money moves through the city like a target on wheels. These people aren't just driving trucks, they're carrying millions through streets where every route can turn into a trap. Ritchie uses that world well. There's something naturally tense about armored truck security. It's ordinary enough to feel grounded, but dangerous enough that every stop, every loading bay, every quiet stretch of road feels like something could go wrong. Then Jason Statham enters the picture as Patrick Hill, or H, and the film locks in even further. He isn't introduced like a regular hero. He's quiet, stiff, almost suspiciously calm. He barely passes the required tests for the job, which is almost funny. Come on, it's Jason Statham. The audience knows before anyone in the movie does. This man is not some average new employee trying to earn a paycheck. He's hiding something. The question isn't whether he's dangerous, the question is why he's pretending not to be. That's where Wrath of Man fits comfortably into Ritchie's crime thriller identity. The movie runs on secrets. People aren't who they say they are. Motives are buried under routine. A job is never just a job. A robbery is never just a robbery. Every character seems to be carrying some kind of angle, even if the film doesn't reveal it right away. And because of that, the crime elements do more than decorate the story, they shape the entire mood. What's interesting is that Ritchie strips away some of his usual flash. There are still criminals with colorful nicknames, still sharp little character moments, still that sense of a messy underworld full of schemes and grudges. But Wrath of Man is less interested in being playful. It's more interested in pressure, suspicion, payback. I have a feeling that something ugly happened before the movie even started, and now everyone is slowly moving toward the consequences. That seriousness won't work for everybody. Some viewers come to Guy Ritchie wanting the fast-talking chaos, the dark comedy, the clever banter, the stylish madness. And honestly, if that's what you want, Wrath of Man might feel a bit too stiff, maybe even too grim. But taken on its own terms as a hard-edged crime thriller, it has a strong identity. It knows the kind of world it wants to build, and it doesn't soften that world to make it easier to digest. This is a movie full of violent men, dirty money, hidden loyalties, and revenge dressed up as procedure. It's not trying to make the criminal world look funny, not really. Even when the film is entertaining, there's a bitterness underneath it. The people in this story are either hunting, hiding, lying, or waiting for the next job to go wrong. That's the atmosphere Ritchie creates here, and for the most part, it works. So, as a Guy Ritchie crime thriller, Wrath of Man is familiar but not exactly typical. It has the bones of his usual world, but the personality is darker, less witty, more punishing, less a swaggering gangster puzzle and more a cold revenge machine wrapped inside a heist film. That's why the movie stands out even when it's not as lively or inventive as his best work. It feels like Ritchie taking his crime instincts and tightening them into something more brutal, not necessarily better than his classics, but definitely sharper than a generic action thriller. It has enough violence, mystery, tension, and moral grime to remind you whose hands are on the wheel. You may not love every choice, you may miss the humor, you may even feel the film takes itself a little too seriously at times, but there's no denying that Wrath of Man has a clear crime thriller identity. It's cold, bloody, direct, and built around the kind of dangerous world where one wrong move can turn a cash route into a battlefield. What's interesting about Wrath of Man is that it doesn't feel like Guy Ritchie trying to entertain you in the usual Guy Ritchie way, and that might sound strange, because yes, the film still has crime, guns, armored trucks, criminals, nicknames, betrayals, and a whole lot of angry men standing in rooms acting like they know exactly how the world works. On paper, this should feel like classic Ritchie territory, but the actual mood of the movie is different, much colder, much more controlled, almost as if Ritchie deliberately turned the volume down on the loudest parts of his style. There's no constant rapid-fire joking here, no wild comic rhythm carrying you from one scene to the next, no big sense that the film is winking at the audience while criminals make terrible decisions. Wrath of Man is more straight-faced than that. It's not trying to be charming in the same way, it's trying to be tense. And honestly, that shift is probably one of the biggest reasons the movie divided people. When audiences go into a Guy Ritchie crime film, they usually expect a certain flavor, a swagger, clever dialogue, rough, ridiculous characters bouncing off each other with dark comic energy. Even when the violence is brutal, there's usually a kind of mischievous fun underneath it. But Wrath of Man doesn't really play that game. This movie moves like it has a grudge. It's slower, heavier, and much more direct. The humor is there in small pieces, especially early on with the workplace banter and the strange nicknames, but it never becomes the film's main personality. Once the revenge story begins to take shape, the tone hardens, and the movie stops joking around and just keeps pushing forward. That restraint can be frustrating if you wanted the old Ritchie spark. I get that. There are moments where you almost wait for the film to loosen up, to give you sharp banter or a flashy trick that makes everything feel more playful, but it rarely does. Instead, it stays locked into this grim mood, letting the violence, the score, and Jason Statham's silence do most of the talking. In a strange way, that's also what makes the movie work. Wrath of Man feels less like a chaotic gangster puzzle and more like a machine, built around revenge, suspicion, and inevitability. H isn't a talkative character. He doesn't fill scenes with charm. He walks into Fortica like a man carrying a storm inside him, and the film matches that energy. Quiet, watchful, brutal when it needs to be. Ritchie's direction here is still stylish, but it's not showing off every 5 seconds. The style is tighter, the camera has control, the action is staged clearly, the structure still jumps around in time, but the overall presentation feels more disciplined and wild. You can feel him trying to make a harder, leaner thriller, even if the movie isn't always as lean as it wants to be. That seriousness gives the film a certain weight. The armor truck world feels dangerous, the criminals feel unpleasant, the violence doesn't feel like decoration. When the movie gets bloody, it wants you to feel the ugliness of it. There's very little softness here and almost no romance, no warmth, no easy moral comfort. Everyone is either damaged, corrupt, violent, or hiding something. Is that always enjoyable? Not exactly. Sometimes the movie becomes so self-serious that it starts to lose some personality. There are stretches where you can feel the absence of that classic Ritchie liveliness. The film is well made, but it's not always fun the way his best crime movies are fun. It has tension, but not always surprise. It has style, but not always that spark. Still, I respect the choice. Ritchie could have made this louder, filled it with more jokes, more verbal fireworks, more eccentric side characters stealing scenes. Instead, he makes something colder and more punishing, a revenge thriller that doesn't really care whether you like the people inside it. That makes Wrath of Man feel like a different kind of Guy Ritchie film, not his most playful, not his most inventive, Maybe not even his most memorable, but it has a mood, and it sticks to it. It feels like Ritchie stepping away from the cheeky crime caper energy and aiming for something more mature, more brutal, and more emotionally closed off. Whether that works for you probably depends on what you want from him. If you want the fast-talking chaos of Snatch or Lock, Stock, this might feel too stiff, too grim, maybe even a little dry. But if you can accept Wrath of Man as a stripped-down, hard-faced revenge thriller, there's something satisfying about watching Ritchie operate in this darker register. It's not Guy Ritchie at his most fun, but it might be Guy Ritchie at one of his most severe. The tricky thing with Wrath of Man is that you almost can't talk about it without dragging Guy Ritchie's older films into the conversation. That may not be entirely fair, but it's unavoidable. When a director has movies like Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels, Snatch, and The Gentleman in his filmography, people bring expectations with them. They don't just walk into the new movie cold, they walk in waiting for that specific Ritchie energy, fast mouths, messy criminals, sharp editing, dark jokes, and a story that feels like it's constantly folding back on itself just to show off a little. Wrath of Man has some of that DNA, but it doesn't have the same personality. Compared with Snatch, this film feels much less playful. Snatch is chaotic in a way that feels alive. Everyone is talking too fast, lying too much, and stumbling into trouble they barely understand. Wrath of Man, by comparison, is stiff-backed and serious. It's not trying to make criminals funny. It's not trying to turn violence into a punchline. The world here is colder, and the people in it feel more dead-eyed. Compared with Lock, Stock, it's also less inventive. Lock, Stock had that scrappy, unpredictable rhythm where the style itself felt hungry, a rough, clever, almost street-level confidence. Wrath of Man is more polished, more expensive-looking, and probably more controlled, but it doesn't always have the same spark. It's well made, no doubt, but it doesn't feel like it's discovering its own language in real time. And then there's The Gentleman, probably the more recent comparison people will make. That film still had Ritchie leaning into the talky, stylish, criminal chessboard side of his work. Wrath of Man strips a lot of that away. It keeps the crime, the schemes, the tough guys, and the layered plotting, but removes much of the cheeky flavor. It's like watching Ritchie take one of his usual gangster stories and drain out most of the comedy until only the revenge and gunmetal are left. That's not automatically a bad thing. In fact, part of what makes Wrath of Man interesting is that it doesn't simply feel like Ritchie repeating his greatest hits. He's working in familiar territory, but the attitude is different. This isn't a film full of charming rogues trying to climb the underworld ladder. These people are harder to like. Some are corrupt, some are desperate, some are greedy, and some are just broken beyond repair. The movie isn't asking us to enjoy their company in the same way. Still, I understand why some fans felt disappointed. When you know what Ritchie can do with dialogue, humor, and criminal absurdity, Wrath of Man can feel a little muted. There are moments where you almost expect the film to suddenly loosen up and give you one of those great verbal exchanges or strange comic detours, but it usually stays on its path, a serious face, loaded weapon, no wink. That makes it feel closer to a straightforward revenge thriller than a classic Ritchie crime caper. And honestly, that's where the divide comes in. Some viewers will look at Wrath of Man and say, this is Ritchie matured, tightening his style, cutting the fat, delivering a brutal genre film. Others will say, where's the fun? Where's the wit? Where's the personality that made his earlier films stand out? Both reactions make sense, because Wrath of Man isn't as lively as Snatch, isn't as fresh as Lock, Stock, and isn't as verbally entertaining as The Gentleman. But it's also not trying to be those movies. It's heavier, darker, and more focused on tension than charm. Whether that feels like growth or limitation depends entirely on what version of Guy Ritchie you prefer. For me, the comparison works both for and against the film. On its own, Wrath of Man is a solid, hard-edged crime thriller with a strong atmosphere and a nasty sense of momentum. But placed next to Ritchie's best work, it does feel less distinctive. It has the craftsmanship, the criminal world, and the structural games, but not quite the same electricity. So no, I wouldn't put this above Snatch or Lock, Stock. I wouldn't even call it Ritchie at his most inventive, but I also wouldn't dismiss it as empty or lazy. It's more like a stripped-down variation of his crime instincts, less fireworks, more pressure, less comedy, more punishment. And maybe that's the best way to watch it, not as the next great Guy Ritchie gangster classic, but as a darker side road in the same universe of criminals, money, violence, and bad decisions. Wrath of Man doesn't waste much time telling you what kind of world you're stepping into. The film opens with an armored truck robbery in Los Angeles, and right away there's no glossy warm-up, no friendly introduction, no slow tour of the characters' lives. We're thrown into a cash transport job that goes horribly wrong. Guards are killed, a bystander dies, the thieves disappear with the money, and just like that, the movie plants a question in the back of your mind before you even fully understand who matters. Yet that opening is important, because it doesn't play like a random action scene that feels more like a wound the rest of the movie keeps pressing on. At first, we don't have the full picture, we only see enough to understand that something brutal happened, something organized, something bigger than a basic robbery. The violence is quick and ugly, and the scene has a cold, procedural quality to it. It's not flashy in a fun way, it's not exciting like a heroic shootout. It's tense because the people inside the truck are trapped in a job where one bad route, one bad decision, or one piece of bad information can get everyone killed. That's a smart way to start this kind of story, because before Patrick Hill even becomes the center of the movie, the opening already establishes the rules. This is a world built around money in motion. Armored trucks are supposed to represent protection, security, routine, but in Wrath of Man, they feel like moving targets. Every delivery has danger attached to it. Every stop has the possibility of an ambush. Even the people doing an ordinary day's work are walking into something that could turn violent without warning. The robbery also gives the film its mystery. We know people died. We know the attack wasn't just a simple smash and grab. We know there's more behind it. But Ritchie doesn't explain everything immediately, and that restraint gives the opening more power. It hangs over the movie. You keep waiting for the connection. Who are the robbers? How did they know what to hit? Why did that specific attack matter so much? And why does the film seem so determined to return to it from different angles? That's where the opening works as more than just a hook, it becomes the story's hidden engine. Later, when H shows up at Fortico, that opening robbery starts to feel less like background information and more like the thing he's moving toward. The film lets you sense that he's not just taking a job, he's walking into the aftermath of something personal. And because we've already seen how brutal that world can be, his quiet intensity makes more sense. He doesn't look like a man trying to fit in. He looks like a man entering enemy territory. There's also something very Guy Ritchie about starting with a crime and then refusing to let the audience fully understand it right away. He gives us the event first, then spends the film rearranging its meaning. What seemed like an opening robbery slowly becomes a puzzle piece, then a motive, then a path toward revenge. The scene changes shape as the movie goes on. That's one of the better things about Wrath of Man. It understands that a violent opening only matters if it leaves a mark. Plenty of action thrillers start with a loud scene and then move on as if it was just there to wake up the audience. This one doesn't. The opening robbery infects the whole story. It affects H, Fortico, the criminals, the mood, and the way we watch every armored truck sequence after it. From that point on, every cash run has tension built in. Even if nothing happens, you expect something to happen. You've already seen what this world can do. You've already watched the routine collapse into murder. So when the film later puts H inside one of those trucks, there's an immediate sense of pressure. We're not just wondering whether another robbery will happen, we're wondering what he'll do when it does. And of course, when violence returns, H's reaction tells us the opening wasn't only about the robbers, it was about him. To his silence, his false ordinariness, his strange calm under pressure. All of that ties back to that first attack. The movie keeps pulling us toward the truth behind it, but it doesn't rush. It lets the robbery sit there like a locked door. So, as an opening, it does its job very well. It's brutal enough to grab attention, mysterious enough to create questions, and important enough that it doesn't feel disposable. It sets the tone, establishes the stakes, and gives the film a reason to feel dangerous before we even know the full revenge story. Wrath of Man begins with blood on the road and money disappearing into the city. Everything after that is just the movie slowly showing us who's still paying for it. One thing Wrath of Man does pretty well is make the cash transport business feel like a strange little war zone hiding inside normal city life. Fordico Security is not glamorous. It's not some sleek intelligence agency with glass offices and high-tech screens everywhere. It's a company moving money from one place to another, day after day, route after route, truck after truck. On the surface, it feels routine. Name men clock in, put on the uniform, take the truck out, follow procedure, come back alive, hopefully. Simple job, except it isn't simple at all. Because the moment the film puts you inside this world, you realize these guards are basically driving around Los Angeles with millions of dollars locked behind them. That alone gives every scene built-in tension. Even when nothing is happening, the danger is obvious. The truck is heavy, armored, secure, but it's also a target. A big moving invitation for anyone reckless enough, organized enough, or desperate enough to try something. That's what makes Fordico such a strong setting for this kind of thriller. It's not some random workplace where danger has to be forced into the story. The danger is already part of the job. Every route could go wrong, every stop could be watched, every new employee could be hiding something, every guard could be brave, careless, scared, corrupt, or just tired enough to make a mistake. The film understands that. When H joins Fordico, he's stepping into a workplace that already feels uneasy. The people around him have their own rhythms, their own jokes, their own macho little routines. Some of them talk big, some seem nervous, some act like they've seen enough bad days to know when something is off. It gives the company a rough, lived-in atmosphere, not always likable, honestly, but believable for the kind of hard-edged world the movie is building. There's also an interesting contrast between the boring side of the job and the deadly side of it. 1 minute it's training, paperwork, locker room banter, supervisors, nicknames, and people testing the new guy. The next minute the whole thing can turn into a shootout. That shift is exactly where Wrath of Man finds a lot of its tension. It takes a job that should be repetitive and turns that repetition into suspense. Because once we know what can happen to an armored truck, every ordinary moment feels loaded. A loading bay isn't just a loading bay anymore. A quiet street isn't just a quiet street. A routine cash pickup isn't just another shift. It becomes a question: who's watching, who's waiting, and who inside this company knows more than they're saying? That last part matters. Fordico isn't just a location, it's part of the mystery. H isn't there because he dreams of becoming Employee of the Month. He's using the company as a way into the world that took something from him, which makes every interaction feel slightly suspicious. He studies people, he listens more than he speaks. He watches faces, he notices reactions. The job becomes a cover, and the workplace becomes a hunting ground. The film gets a lot out of that setup. The cash transport world also gives the story a strong physical structure. Trucks move through the city, money changes hands, crews rotate, routes repeat, robbers plan around patterns, criminals need information, security guards need trust. That means the whole movie is built around systems, and systems can be broken. Someone can leak a route, someone can panic, someone can betray the team. Someone like H can walk in pretending to be ordinary and start turning the system inside out. That's why the armor truck setting works better than it might sound on paper. It's not just background decoration that gives the movie its pressure. These vehicles are like little metal boxes full of cash, fear, and bad decisions. Once the door is closed, the characters are trapped with each other, and if trouble comes, there's nowhere elegant to run. Fordico also gives Ritchie a good excuse to fill the film with different types of men under pressure: the loud ones, the nervous ones, the suspicious ones, the ones who think they're tougher than they actually are. And then there's H standing among them like a locked safe with a pulse. He doesn't fit in, and that's the point. Everyone can feel something strange about him, but no one knows what to do with it yet. The workplace banter doesn't always land perfectly. Some of it is crude. Some of it feels intentionally rough, and depending on the viewer, it might either add texture or just make the first stretch feel a bit unpleasant. but it does help establish Fortico as a masculine, tense, emotionally closed-off environment. These are people who joke, insult, and posture because that's easier than admitting the job scares them. And honestly, the job probably should scare them. Wrath of Man makes money transport feel like a profession where safety is mostly an illusion. The armor helps, the guns help, the protocols help, but none of it removes the basic fact that every truck is carrying something people are willing to kill for. That danger gives the movie a constant low rumble of suspense. So Fortico is more than just the place where H gets hired. It's the doorway into the film's entire criminal ecosystem. It connects the guards, the robbers, the inside betrayals, the old robbery, and the revenge mission. It's where routine meets violence, where procedure meets corruption, where an ordinary workday can suddenly become a battlefield. And once H walks into that world, the place stops feeling like a company. It starts feeling like a trap waiting to close. Patrick Hill doesn't enter Wrath of Man like a normal new employee. That's the first thing that feels off. He walks into Fortico security with the face of a man who's already lived through the worst day of his life and has no interest in explaining it to anyone. He's quiet, too quiet. Really, not shy, not nervous, not awkward in the usual new guy way, just closed off. Like every answer he gives has been measured before it leaves his mouth. And right away, the film wants us to notice that something about him doesn't add up. He applies for a job at an armor truck company, goes through the basic tests, and barely passes. That detail is almost funny because the audience is looking at Jason Statham. We already know the man isn't going to be some average cash truck guard who panics the first time somebody points a gun at him. So when H just scrapes through the training requirements, it feels less like weakness and more like performance. He's not failing because he can't do better. He's passing just enough because he doesn't want anyone asking too many questions. That's where the movie starts playing its little game with us. The people at Fortico see a serious, cold British guy trying to get hired. The audience sees a loaded weapon pretending to be a tool. And Ritchie uses that gap nicely. We're ahead of the characters but not ahead of the story. We know H is dangerous, but we don't know why he's there. That makes his arrival interesting. It's not about whether he can handle the job. Obviously he can. The real question is what job he's actually doing, because it's clearly not the one printed on the application form. There's something almost uncomfortable about the way H studies the room. He doesn't talk much, but he's always taking things in. Faces, reactions, weaknesses, the way people move around him, the way they speak when they think he's just another hire. He doesn't try to charm anybody. He doesn't try to fit into the group. He lets the nicknames, the insults, the workplace banter, and the little tests come at him, and he absorbs it all without giving much back. That restraint makes him stand out more than if he'd entered the film bragging about his skills. A lot of action movies introduce their hero by making him obviously impressive from the first second. Wrath of Man does the opposite. It lets H look almost dull on paper. He passes, but not by much. He seems competent, but not exceptional. He's professional, but not friendly. The trick is that the ordinariness feels too carefully arranged, like someone has built a disguise out of mediocrity. That's a pretty strong way to introduce a revenge-driven character. He's not storming into the company demanding answers. He's not making speeches. He's not punching walls or announcing his pain. He's slipping into the system quietly, wearing the uniform, learning the routes, standing beside men who have no idea what kind of person they've just let into their world. There's patience in that, a scary kind of patience. The mystery around H works because Statham plays him like a man with everything locked down. His face barely moves. His voice stays low. His body language is controlled to the point where even small gestures feel deliberate. You don't get warmth from him. You don't get vulnerability right away. What you get is pressure. He feels like someone holding back a reaction that could destroy the room if it ever gets loose. That makes the early Fortico scenes more watchable than they might have been otherwise. On the surface, they're workplace setup scenes as the new guy gets introduced. The co-workers size him up. The company explains the job, but underneath that, the film is asking us to watch H watching everyone else. That's where the tension sits. Who is he looking for? What does he already know? And how long can he keep pretending to be ordinary? His arrival also creates a nice contrast with the rest of the Fordico crew. Some of them are loud, some are nervous, some act tough, some are suspicious, and some are just trying to get through the day. H doesn't match any of them. He feels like he came from a different movie and decided to stand very still until this movie caught up with him. That could have been ridiculous, but it works because the film knows exactly what it's doing. H is supposed to feel misplaced. He's supposed to look overqualified. He's supposed to make the audience wonder why a man with that much control would choose a job where he's taking orders from people who clearly don't understand him. The answer, of course, is hidden inside the film's larger revenge story. But before the movie gives us that answer, it lets the suspicion build. That's the fun of H's introduction. He's not mysterious because the script keeps saying, "Look how mysterious this man is." He's mysterious because every practical detail about him feels false at the failed test. The calm attitude, the blank expression, the way danger doesn't seem to surprise him, the way he behaves like someone who's already planned 3 moves past everyone else. By the time he's actually tested in the field, the audience is waiting for the mask to slip. That's why his arrival is so important. It sets up the entire rhythm of the character. H isn't a normal guard who becomes dangerous. He's a dangerous man pretending to be a normal guard. The movie doesn't need to tell us that immediately, it lets us feel it. Patrick Hill walks into Fordico like a mystery in a work uniform, and from the second he arrives, the place already feels less like a job site and more like the beginning of a hunt. The moment Wrath of Man really shows its hand isn't when H walks into Fordico, it's when the truck gets hit. Up until that point, the film has let us sit with suspicion. H is quiet. He barely passes the tests. He moves like someone hiding more than he's saying. Everyone around him thinks they're dealing with a strange new guy, maybe a little cold, maybe a little too serious, but still just another employee. Then the robbery happens, and the whole illusion falls apart in about 30 seconds. What makes the scene work is how quickly the power dynamic changes. At first, it looks like a nightmare scenario for the guards. Bullet is taken hostage. Dave starts panicking. Everyone is trapped inside the pressure of the moment, and the robbers seem to have control. This is the kind of situation the job has been warning them about. Guns out, adrenaline high. One wrong move and people die, and then H moves. Not like a scared guard, not like someone improvising, not like a man who got lucky. He moves like he's done this before. That's the shock of the scene. The film doesn't suddenly turn him into an action hero with a big speech or a dramatic pose. He just handles the situation with brutal, clean efficiency. One attacker after another goes down, and the more the scene unfolds, the more obvious it becomes that H was never barely qualified. He was never average. He was never the man Fordico thought it hired. He was pretending. Honestly, that reveal is satisfying because the movie has been teasing it without over-explaining. We already knew something was off, but watching the other characters realize it in real time gives the scene its punch. They're not just impressed, they're unsettled. This new guy, the one who barely made it through the firing test, just wiped out a crew of armed robbers with frightening precision. That's not normal bravery. That's training. That's experience. That's something much darker. The scene also changes how everyone looks at H. Before this, he was an outsider trying to fit into a rough workplace. After this, he becomes a kind of legend inside Fordico. His co-workers look at him with respect, but also with confusion. Because saving the day is one thing, a killing like that is another. There's a difference between courage and controlled violence, and H crosses that line so calmly that it raises more questions than it answers. Why is he this good? Why did he hide it? And why, after killing the robbers, does he check their faces? That detail is important. H isn't just defending the truck, he's looking, searching, studying. The robbery isn't only an attack to survive, it's an opportunity. He wants to know who these men are. He wants to see if any of them match the faces in his head. That small action tells us his mission is much more personal than the company realizes. It's one of those moments where the film gives you information without stopping to explain itself. H's violence is impressive, yes, but his behavior afterward is even more revealing. He's not shaken. He's not proud. He doesn't look like a man enjoying hero status. He looks disappointed, almost because the people he killed may not have been the ones he came to find. That gives the action scene a sharper edge. In a lesser movie, this could have just been the Jason Statham is awesome scene, and to be fair, it partly is that the audience came to see him do exactly this kind of thing, stay calm under pressure, outshoot everybody, and make a whole group of criminals regret waking up that morning. But Wrath of Man uses the scene for more than simple excitement. It turns action into character revelation. The violence tells us who H really is, or at least who he's capable of being. The aftermath tells us he's hunting someone. That combination is what makes the scene memorable. It's not just a shootout, it's the first crack in the disguise. The moment Fortico realizes it's hired a man who doesn't belong behind the wheel of an armored truck unless he has a reason for being there. And the film gets a lot of mileage out of that sudden shift. Before the robbery, H is a question mark. After the robbery, he becomes a threat. Even the people on his side don't fully know whether they should feel safer around him or more afraid. He saved them, sure, but he also showed them a version of himself that doesn't fit the job, the test results, or the quiet act he's been performing. That's the kind of action reveal that works because it feels earned. The movie has already set up the armored truck world as dangerous. It's already shown what can happen when criminals attack. It's already made H feel suspicious. So when he finally explodes into action, it doesn't feel random, it feels like the thing the film has been holding back. And after that scene, there's no going back. H can still keep secrets, but he can't pretend to be ordinary anymore. Everyone at Fortico now knows there's something dangerous under the surface. They just don't know whether it's a blessing, a warning, or the beginning of something worse. That first action reveal is where Wrath of Man stops whispering about H and lets the bullets speak for him. And what they say is very simple. This man did not come here for a paycheck. The best thing Wrath of Man does early on is keep H at a distance. Not physically, he's right there in the middle of the story. Driving trucks, standing in locker rooms, sitting with co-workers, taking orders from people who clearly have no idea who they're talking to. But emotionally, the film keeps him locked behind glass. We can watch him, we can study him, we can guess things about him, but we're not allowed inside his head too quickly. That's what gives the first stretch of the movie its pull, because H isn't mysterious in a flashy way. He's not walking around leaving dramatic clues or making cryptic speeches. He's actually the opposite. He says very little, he reacts even less. He looks at people like he's measuring them and then moves on. That kind of silence can be boring if the movie has nothing behind it. But here it creates pressure. You can feel that something is being hidden, and the film knows you can feel it. The real question isn't whether this man is dangerous. We already know that answer pretty quickly. The real question is why he's here. That's the hook. A man with H's skill set doesn't just wander into an armored truck company because he wants stable work and a decent uniform. He barely passes his tests, but then handles a robbery like a trained executioner. He keeps his face blank, but his eyes are always searching. He doesn't act like a hero after saving his teammate. He acts like someone checking a list and finding the wrong names on it. That's where the film starts to feel less like a simple action movie and more like a slow investigation disguised as a workplace thriller. H is using Fortico. That much becomes clear. He's not there to belong. He's not trying to build friendships. He's not even particularly interested in being respected, though that happens after his first shootout. He's there because the company is connected to something, some robbery, some crew, some face he needs to find. He's put himself inside the machine because that's the only way to trace what moved through it. And I like that Ritchie doesn't immediately explain all of this in one clean dump of information. He lets the suspicion build in pieces. H asks questions without seeming curious. He watches people without making it obvious. He studies the aftermath of violence with a kind of cold focus. Even when others are reacting emotionally, he's processing. It makes him feel less like a normal protagonist and more like a storm system slowly moving toward land. There's also a strange tension in the way the other characters respond to him. At first, they underestimate him, then they admire him, then they start wondering what they've actually invited into their workplace. He becomes a hero inside Fortico, but not a comforting one. He saved lives, yes, but he did it with a level of violence that raises more questions than it solves. You can almost see the thought forming in their minds. Who exactly is this guy? And the film keeps teasing that question from different angles. The FBI connection adds another layer. When agents question him and then he's suddenly released because someone higher up seems to know more than they're saying, the mystery widens. H isn't just some random tough man with a tragic past. There are people outside Fortico who understand something about him, or at least know enough to stay out of his way. That makes his identity feel bigger than the job, bigger than the company, maybe even bigger than the robbery we saw at the beginning. But the movie is careful not to make him too clean. That's important. H isn't framed like a noble hero hiding behind a fake name until justice calls. There's something morally uncomfortable about him from the start. He's controlled, yes, but not gentle. Focused, but not innocent. Whatever happened to him has pushed him into a place where revenge isn't just a goal, it's his entire operating system. He's not trying to heal, he's trying to locate a target. That gives the mystery a darker flavor. We're curious about who he is, but we're also a little unsure whether knowing the answer will make us feel better. Sometimes mystery in action films is just a way to make the hero look cooler. Here, the mystery makes H feel damaged, dangerous, almost hollowed out by whatever he's carrying. His silence isn't just cool guy attitude, that feels like a symptom. And once the story starts revealing more, the pieces do fall into place. The armor truck robbery, the dead son, the reason he's looking through faces, the reason Fortico matters, the reason he can move through violence without blinking. But even when the explanation arrives, the film doesn't suddenly make him more easy to understand. It gives us motive, not comfort. That's why the mystery works better than the basic revenge setup might suggest. On paper, it's familiar. A man loses someone, goes looking for the people responsible, and leaves bodies behind him. We've seen that story many times, but Wrath of Man gets mileage out of delaying the emotional truth. For a while, H isn't a grieving father to us. He's a question, a weapon, a man pretending to be smaller than he is so he can get closer to the people he wants. And because the film reveals him slowly, his presence keeps the story moving. Even when the plot itself becomes heavy or complicated, you keep watching because you want to understand the act. You want to see when the mask drops. You want to know whether the next person he meets is just another co-worker or the person he came to punish. Every conversation has that tension underneath it. Every look might mean something. Every robbery might bring him closer. That's the real strength of H's identity mystery. It turns a simple job into a cover story and a simple action hero into something colder. He's not at Fortico to protect money. He's there because somewhere inside that world, hidden among roots, crews, thieves, and lies, is the answer to the one question that has consumed him. And once he finds that answer, the movie makes it very clear. H is not the kind of man who came looking for closure. He came looking for a reckoning. Once Wrath of Man finally reveals what's driving H, the movie becomes a lot simpler and, at the same time, a lot darker, because underneath all the armored trucks, criminal crews, workplace suspicion, and shifting timelines, this is really a revenge story. A father loses his son in a violent robbery, and after that, something inside him just shuts down. He's not trying to move on, he's not looking for peace, he's not asking the system to deliver justice in some clean, official way. He wants the people responsible. That's it. Honestly, that kind of motivation isn't new. We've seen revenge movies built around murdered family members, dead children, betrayed partners, and broken men picking up weapons because grief has nowhere else to go. On paper, Wrath of Man is walking into very familiar territory. But the film gets some extra weight out of how cold H becomes after the loss. He doesn't perform grief loudly. There are no giant emotional speeches, no desperate breakdown every 20 minutes. No big monologue explaining how much pain he's in. Jason Statham plays H like a man whose grief has turned into discipline. That's what makes him unsettling. He's not exploding because of his pain. He's organizing it. Every move he makes after his son's death feels like part of a larger calculation, which makes the revenge feel less like rage and more like procedure. He doesn't just run into the street shooting at random suspects. He infiltrates Fortico. He studies the people connected to the robbery. He waits. He watches. He gets close to the world that caused the tragedy because he understands the truth is buried inside that system. The company, the roots, the robbers, the inside information, that all of it becomes part of the path leading back to his son's killers. There's something grimly effective about that. H isn't a normal grieving father in this story, and the film doesn't pretend he is. He already belonged to a violent world before the tragedy fully defined him. That matters, because his revenge isn't about an ordinary man discovering violence for the first time. It's about a dangerous man being given one personal reason to stop holding back. The loss doesn't create his capacity for violence, it gives that violence a direction. That's probably why the movie's emotional center feels so cold. It's not sentimental. It doesn't soften H with long, tender memories. It doesn't spend too much time trying to make him openly sympathetic. Instead, it lets the death of his son sit behind his eyes, always there, but buried under control. You can feel this man is broken, but he's broken in a way that makes him more focused, not more vulnerable. That choice will land differently for different viewers. Some may find it powerful, because the restraint makes H feel more dangerous. He's not crying to convince us he cares, he's tearing apart an entire criminal network because caring has become the only thing left in him. Others might feel the film holds him at such a distance that the emotional impact is weaker than it should be. We understand his pain, but we don't always feel invited into it. That's a fair criticism, because revenge stories need emotional fuel. If the grief is too hidden, the revenge can start to feel mechanical. There are moments in Wrath of Man where H is so locked down, so silent, so unreadable, that the film risks turning personal tragedy into just another excuse for gunfire. You know why he's angry, but you don't always feel the full human cost of what happened. Still, there's something fitting about that emotional emptiness. H isn't trying to be whole again. He isn't on a healing journey. He isn't learning to forgive or rediscovering his humanity. This isn't that kind of movie. His son's death has narrowed his entire life into one mission, and the film follows that narrowing. The world becomes smaller, the choices become harsher. Every person is either useful, suspicious, guilty, or in the way. That's where the title starts to make more sense, too. Wrath of Man sounds a little grand, maybe even too grand at first, but once the revenge engine is fully clear, the title fits the mood. This isn't justice as a moral ideal, it's wrath as punishment, personal, brutal, and completely uninterested in mercy. The tragedy also changes the way we read H's earlier behavior, his blank expression, his suspicious silence, the way he checks faces after killing robbers. All of it becomes tied to the loss. He isn't just being mysterious for style, he's searching for the face that belongs to his pain. Every robbery is a possible lead, every criminal body is a possible answer, every shift at Fortico is another step toward the person who turned him into this. And when the film finally connects the personal loss to the larger heist story, it gives the violence a sharper purpose. The shootouts aren't just action beats anymore, they're part of a revenge map. H is following the blood trail backward, and the closer he gets, the less human he seems willing to remain. That's what makes him both compelling and uncomfortable. You may want him to find the killer, you may even root for him when the bad guys start getting what's coming to them, but the movie never fully lets you forget that this isn't a clean hero. He isn't fixing the world, he's answering pain with more pain. The people he hunts may be guilty, but the man doing the hunting is damaged beyond any easy moral comfort, and maybe that's the most honest part of the revenge story. Wrath of Man doesn't treat grief as something noble, it treats grief as something that can rot into obsession. H's love for his son is real, but what it becomes is frightening. It becomes patience, violence, strategy, a cold refusal to stop until the debt is paid. So yes, the revenge setup is familiar, but the film's version of it has a hard, bitter edge. It's not about triumph, it's not even really about closure. It's about a man who loses the one thing that mattered and decides that someone else has to lose everything too. And from that point on, H isn't living, he's hunting. H is the kind of character who doesn't need to raise his voice to make a room feel smaller. That's a big part of why Wrath of Man works when it works. The movie builds him less like a traditional action hero and more like a locked door. You can stand in front of him, you can knock, you can ask questions, but you're not getting inside unless he decides to open it, and most of the time he doesn't. He's cold, not cool in the charming sense, but cold in the way metal is cold, still, hard, and not especially interested in whether you're comfortable around it. From the first time he appears at Fortico, H carries himself like someone who's stripped away every unnecessary part of his personality. No friendly small talk, no nervous laughter, no attempt to win people over. He lets the other guards talk, joke, insult, panic, brag, and posture. He just watches. That silence becomes its own kind of intimidation, because you can tell he isn't quiet out of weakness. He's quiet because nothing around him is worth wasting energy on. And then, when violence starts, the whole character makes sense. H doesn't fight like someone trying to survive the moment. He fights like someone who already accepted the moment before it happened. That's what makes him feel so dangerous. He isn't shocked by chaos, he's prepared for it. When bullets start flying, everyone else reacts. H executes. There's a difference. The film leans heavily into the one-man army image. He can walk into a situation that would break most people and come out looking almost annoyed that it took this long. Armed robbers, criminal crews, ambushes, pressure, blood, panic, none of it visibly shakes him. He absorbs danger with a dead-eyed calm. Because Jason Statham plays him so tightly, the character almost feels less like a man and more like a weapon that learned how to wear a uniform. That could easily become ridiculous, and to be fair, sometimes it almost does. There are moments where H's invulnerability stretches belief. He takes punishment that should slow him down. He survives things that would put a normal person in the ground. The movie asks us to accept that this man is tougher, smarter, calmer, and more dangerous than nearly everyone around him. And depending on your tolerance for Statham-style action logic, you either go with it or roll your eyes a little. I went with it most of the time, because the film isn't really pretending H is an ordinary person. It presents him from the start as someone outside the normal scale of the Fortico world. Everyone else feels human in the usual messy way. They panic, they talk too much, they make bad choices, they want money, respect, safety, or escape. H wants one thing, and that single-mindedness makes him terrifying. His stoicism isn't just personality, it's structure. It's the way he survives. He doesn't give people much to read, which makes him hard to predict. He doesn't explain himself unless he has to, which keeps him in control. He doesn't waste emotion in public, which makes every small crack, every slight look of pain, feel heavier than a whole speech would have. That's where Statham's performance matters. People often joke that he plays the same tough, unshakable guy in every movie, and sure, Wrath of Man knows exactly what kind of actor it has at the center, but there's a slightly different flavor here. H isn't the fun version of the unstoppable action man. He's not throwing out one-liners after every kill. He's not enjoying the performance of being dangerous. He feels emptied out, and that emptiness gives the violence a colder edge. When H kills, it doesn't feel like rage exploding, it feels like a task being completed. That's more unsettling in some ways. Rage can be messy. H is not messy. He checks faces, he follows leads, he moves through people like they're obstacles between him and a final answer. He doesn't look heroic while doing it, he looks committed. The movie also uses his silence to create tension with everyone around him. His co-workers respect him after seeing what he can do, but they don't really know him. His enemies underestimate him until they can't. Even the people with some understanding of his past seem cautious around him, because H isn't the kind of man you manage to point him somewhere and hope you're not standing in the wrong place when he arrives. That's really the appeal of the character. He isn't complicated in a warm, emotional, talkative way. He's compelling because he's so controlled that you keep waiting for the control to break. You watch him sit there barely speaking, and you know there's something violent underneath the surface. The movie keeps winding that tension tighter until the action gives it a release. But the coldness is also one of the film's limitations. When a character is this stoic, this sealed off, it can make the emotional side harder to feel. We understand his pain, but he doesn't let us sit with it for a long day. He turns grief into motion and keeps moving. That makes him intimidating, but it can also make him distant. There are times when H feels less like a person and more like the physical shape of revenge. Maybe that's the point. Wrath of Man isn't interested in softening him. It doesn't give him much humor, warmth, or vulnerability. It presents him as a man who's narrowed himself down to one mission. Whatever human pieces were there before have been pushed deep under the surface. What remains is discipline, anger, and a terrifying ability to act without hesitation. That's why the one-man army image fits him so well. It's not just about how many people he can kill, it's about how completely alone he seems even when surrounded by others. He doesn't belong to the Fortica crew. He doesn't fully belong to the law. He doesn't even feel like he belongs to normal life anymore. He's moving through the film on a separate track, pulled forward by revenge. And when he finally reaches the people he's been hunting, there's no sense that he's looking for a fair fight. He's looking for payment. That's H in Wrath of Man. Quiet enough to be underestimated, skilled enough to be feared, and broken enough to keep going long after a normal man would stop. He isn't the heart of the movie. He's the weapon the movie is built around. Jason Statham is one of those actors where, before the movie even starts, the audience already brings a whole history with them. You see his name on the poster and you kind of know the deal. He's probably not going to play a nervous accountant discovering himself through pottery. He's going to be tough. He's going to be quiet. He's going to walk into dangerous situations with that same expression that says he's already calculated how badly everyone else is about to lose. And Wrath of Man absolutely uses that. The film knows exactly what people expect from Statham, but it also gives that familiar persona a slightly colder shape. H isn't the cheeky version of the Statham action hero. He isn't particularly fun to be around. He doesn't have that playful confidence you sometimes get in his other films. Here, he's almost drained of charm. And I don't mean that as an insult. That's the point of the role. He plays H like a man who's shut down everything except instinct, memory, and revenge. There's a heaviness to him in this movie. He rarely smiles. He barely reacts. He doesn't waste words. And because Statham has built so much of his career on controlled physical presence, he can make that kind of silence feel active. He isn't doing nothing in these scenes. He's watching, measuring, waiting. You can feel the character thinking even when the script doesn't spell out exactly what's going on behind his eyes. That's probably why the performance works better than it might look on paper, because yes, this is still very much in Statham's usual territory. He's playing a dangerous man with a mysterious past who can take punishment, handle weapons, intimidate rooms, and destroy criminals with almost unfair efficiency. Nobody is pretending this is some wild reinvention of his screen image, but within that familiar space, he finds a more bruised, bitter version of the archetype. H isn't just tough. He's wounded, but not in a way that invites comfort. That's the difference. Statham doesn't play the grief loudly. He doesn't turn every scene into a reminder that this man is suffering. Instead, the pain sits underneath the performance like something buried too deep to remove. His face stays controlled, but the control itself becomes the sign of damage. This is a man holding himself together so tightly that you start to wonder what would happen if he ever actually let go. And in a revenge thriller, that kind of restraint can be more effective than constant emotional outbursts. A louder actor might have pushed the tragedy harder. More crying, more shouting, more scenes built around visible grief. Statham goes the other way. He makes H feel like someone who passed through grief and came out on the other side almost empty. That emptiness becomes frightening. He's not looking for sympathy. He's not asking the audience to love him. He just keeps moving toward the people responsible. There's also something very watchable about how little he needs to do to dominate a scene. He can stand still, say almost nothing, and still feel like the most dangerous person in the room. That's not always about acting range in the traditional sense. It's about screen presence. Some actors have to work very hard to convince you they're a threat. Statham just has to look slightly annoyed. The camera understands him, and Ritchie understands how to use him. The action scenes benefit from that too. Statham has always had a physical clarity that makes his violence easy to read. Even though Wrath of Man is much more about firearms than martial arts, he still moves with that disciplined, Economical quality, nothing feels sloppy. He handles danger like a professional, not like someone trying to look cool for the camera, and that makes his skill feel believable inside the exaggerated world of the film. But the performance won't work for everyone. Some viewers will look at H and feel like they've seen this version of Statham too many times before as a silent tough guy, the invulnerable avenger, the man who gets shot, beaten, cornered, and still keeps coming. And honestly, that criticism isn't completely wrong. Wrath of Man does rely on the audience's existing trust in Statham's action persona. It doesn't spend the whole movie proving he's dangerous, because in a way, his casting already does that work. But I think that's also part of the design. The movie uses our expectations against the characters inside the story. We know H isn't ordinary from the moment we see him. The people around him don't. That gap creates tension. His co-workers think they're judging a new hire, while the audience is waiting for the inevitable moment when the mask drops. Statham's reputation becomes part of the suspense. And when the mask does drop, it's satisfying. Because he doesn't overplay it. He doesn't suddenly become flashy. He doesn't switch into a different personality. He's the same cold, quiet man, only now everyone else can see what was already there. That consistency makes the character feel scarier. H isn't pretending to be calm. He is calm. Even when the bullets start flying, his emotional temperature barely changes. That's where Statham gives the film its center. Wrath of Man has a lot of moving parts: armored trucks, criminal crews, flashbacks, betrayals, heists, revenge, side characters, shifting perspectives. But whenever Statham is on screen, the movie has gravity. Everything pulls toward him. You may not always understand the full plot yet, but you understand the force of this man's presence. Still, because H is written so closed off, the performance creates a trade-off. The mystery is stronger, but the emotional intimacy is weaker. You admire his focus more than you connect with him. You feel his pain at a distance. The film asks Statham to be a wall, and he's a very convincing wall, but walls don't always let you in. For this particular movie, though, that distance mostly fits. H isn't supposed to be charming. He isn't supposed to be emotionally available. He's a man who's turned himself into an answer to violence. Statham understands that and plays him with the kind of hard restraint that makes the revenge feel less like a fantasy and more like a sentence being carried out. So no, Wrath of Man doesn't give us a completely new Jason Statham. It gives us a darker, colder, more emotionally sealed version of what he already does well. And sometimes that's enough, because when a film is built around quiet menace, controlled brutality, and a man walking through hell with unfinished business, there aren't many actors who can sell that with this little effort. Statham doesn't need to explain H. He just has to stand there long enough for everyone else to realize they made a terrible mistake. There's a certain built-in excitement when you see Jason Statham and Guy Ritchie's names attached to the same movie. Even before Wrath of Man begins, that pairing already creates expectations. These two have history. They came up together in that rough, stylish British crime film space where everyone was either scheming, fighting, gambling, lying, or trying to talk their way out of a terrible decision. So when they reunite for a film like this, you naturally expect a very specific kind of energy. Hard men, criminal plans, sharp dialogue, sudden violence, a bit of attitude. Wrath of Man gives you some of that, but not exactly in the old way. That's what makes this collaboration interesting. It's not just Statham showing up to do Statham things while Ritchie throws in a few criminal nicknames and plot twists. The film feels like both of them stepping into familiar territory but with a much colder mood. They aren't trying to recreate the loose, cheeky crime world energy of their earlier work. This one is more severe, more direct, less amused by itself. Statham especially feels like a perfect fit for this version of Ritchie, because Wrath of Man isn't built around charm, it's built around control. Statham's whole screen presence depends on control and the body language, the stillness, the way he can walk into a room and make everyone else look slightly less prepared. Ritchie uses that quality well here. He doesn't force Statham into a talky, comedic role. He lets him become the quiet center of the movie, the heavy object everything else starts orbiting around. And honestly, that's probably the smartest choice, because if this film had tried to make H into a wisecracking gangster type, It would have undercut the whole mood. H isn't there to entertain the room, he's there because something happened, and now every step he takes is aimed at revenge. So Ritchie gives Statham space to be silent, bitter, and unreadable. The performance isn't flashy, but it has weight. At the same time, the collaboration does carry some baggage. When people think of Ritchie and Statham together, they think of a certain spark, that early career electricity where the crime world felt dangerous but also weirdly funny and alive. Wrath of Man doesn't really chase that feeling. There are small traces of it at the nicknames, the rough banter, the criminal ecosystem, the layered plotting, but the film is mostly interested in something darker, which can make the reunion feel both satisfying and slightly surprising. Satisfying, because Statham still fits beautifully inside Ritchie's world of violent men, dirty money, and hidden motives. Surprising, because the movie doesn't give us the playful version of that world, it gives us a revenge machine. Ritchie tightens the screws, and Statham becomes the blunt instrument at the center. You can tell why this pairing works. Ritchie understands how to frame Statham as a myth before fully revealing the man. He lets the audience know there's something dangerous under the surface, then waits for the perfect moment to prove it. And Statham understands how to carry that kind of mystery without needing to explain himself every 5 minutes. He doesn't overact the secrecy, he just becomes impossible to read. That's a useful kind of trust between director and actor. The film can take its time because Statham's presence keeps you watching. The story can hold back answers because Ritchie knows the audience is already curious about why this man is standing there so quietly. And when the action finally comes, the payoff works because both men know exactly what their audience came to see, not chaos for the sake of chaos, but controlled violence delivered with confidence. Still, if you're expecting their most lively collaboration, this might not be it. Wrath of Man doesn't have the same comic snap or scrappy personality that made their earlier work feel so fresh. It's more polished, more serious, and maybe a little less fun. Some viewers will miss that older rhythm I did at certain points. There are scenes where you can almost feel the movie refusing to loosen up, even though Ritchie and Statham together are capable of giving us something much more playful. But I also respect that they didn't simply try to repeat themselves. This collaboration feels older in a way, not tired exactly, but hardened. Like both the director and the star know the genre too well to dress it up as something innocent. There's no youthful swagger here. There's experience, discipline, a kind of grim confidence. Ritchie builds the criminal maze, and Statham walks through it like he's already decided how it ends. That dynamic gives Wrath of Man its strongest identity. Ritchie brings the structure, the shifting perspectives, the underworld texture, the sense that every robbery has 3 stories behind it. Statham brings the physical authority, the quiet menace, and the emotional shutdown that makes H feel less like a hero and more like a consequence. Together, they make the film feel sharper than a generic revenge thriller, even when the story itself moves through familiar territory. And that's really the value of this reunion. It's not just nostalgia, not just remember when these two made crime movies together. It's a different version of the same partnership, less cheeky, more brutal, less talk, more pressure, less fun maybe, but also more punishing. Wrath of Man may not be the most inventive thing either of them has done, and it may not satisfy everyone who came looking for that old Ritchie Statham magic, but it does prove that the pairing still has force. There's still something compelling about watching Ritchie play Statham in a world of criminals and then slowly reveal that everyone else is the one in danger. Because when these two work together, the promise is simple: somebody is hiding something, somebody is going to make a mistake, and Jason Statham is probably going to be standing there when the bill comes due. One of the reasons Wrath of Man holds attention, especially in the first half, is the way it refuses to tell this story in a straight line, and that choice matters, because if this movie had been told from beginning to end in simple order, it probably would have felt much more ordinary. A robbery happens, a man loses someone, he gets a job at the company connected to the robbery, he hunts the people responsible. That's not a bad story, but it's familiar. We've seen that shape before, many times. So Guy Ritchie takes that basic revenge structure and breaks it apart. At first, the movie gives us pieces without context. We see the armor truck robbery, We see H arrive at Fortica months later. We see him barely pass the hiring process. We see him act quiet, strange, and almost too controlled. Then we see him explode into violence when another robbery happens. But even after that, the film doesn't immediately hand us the full explanation. It lets the mystery breathe. That's where the flashbacks come in. The film keeps moving backward and sideways, returning to events we thought we understood and showing them again with new information. A scene that initially feels like a brutal opening crime later becomes something more personal. A character who first seems like just another guard or robber later becomes part of a bigger pattern. A simple cash truck job slowly turns into a web of revenge, inside knowledge, criminal planning, and buried grief. I like this approach mostly because it makes the audience work a little, not in an impossible, confusing for the sake of being confusing way, but you do have to pay attention. Wrath of Man isn't the kind of action movie where you can scroll through your phone during the middle section and still understand every connection. The timeline matters. The order of the reveals matters. The faces matter. The way H reacts to certain people matters. That gives the film a stronger sense of involvement. You're not just waiting for the next shootout, you're trying to connect what happened, when it happened, who knew about it, and why H is moving through this world with such cold patience. The movie gives you enough to stay interested, but not enough to relax completely. There's always this feeling that the story is holding one card back. That's a very Ritchie-style move. Even if the tone here is more serious than usual, he's always enjoyed stories where the audience has to reframe what they saw earlier. Wrath of Man does that too, but instead of using the structure for comic chaos or clever criminal irony, it uses it for tension. The timeline isn't playful so much as investigative. Each flashback takes us closer to the real wound behind H's behavior. And honestly, that's probably why the revenge plot works better than it should. Because when the movie finally reveals H's personal loss, it lands differently than it would have if we knew everything from the beginning.